A boat full of tourists thought they were just there to snap a few photos. Then a whale surfaced right beside them and opened its mouth. And what they saw inside made the whole boat start screaming. Watch the video to see exactly what happened. Ask anybody who works the docks in Bar Harbor about the day Pepper popped up next to the Bridget Ann, and they'll all tell it a little differently. But they'll all start the same way, with the fog finally burning off, and Dale Holt standing on the pier with his coffee, taking full personal credit for a forecast he had absolutely nothing to do with. 26 tickets were sold for the 11 o'clock. Not bad for a morning that had threatened rain all week. Mara Doyle was already on board, coiling rope that didn't need coiling, which was just a thing she did with her hands when she got nervous. And she got nervous most mornings, even though by then she'd been on the water more than half the deckhands who liked to tease her about being new. She had her clipboard with the week's sightings, a few fin whales, a minke, and good old Pepper. A humpback she'd gotten to know the way you get to know a regular at a coffee shop, mostly by the back of her head. In Pepper's case, the underside of her tail was black and white in a splatter pattern that looked, if you squinted, as if somebody had knocked over the salt shaker. Here's a fun bit of trivia Mara liked to drop on people. Every humpback's tail is different, like a fingerprint, and there's a research group up at the college with a catalog going back decades, full of names somebody clearly had fun coming up with: domino, anvil, crescent. Pepper had been in that book since 2009 and had raised 3 calves since, which always got a laugh, because it meant the ocean wasn't this big, scary unknown. It was basically a neighborhood, just one where everybody happened to be the size of a school bus. On board that day was a 9-year-old named Cooper Cormier, riding along with his mom, who'd had a rough spring. His dad had moved out in March, the family dog had passed in May, and somewhere around June, she'd decided, very firmly, that this kid was getting one good day before summer ended. Cooper stood at the rail in a life jacket 2 sizes too big, gripping the strap with both hands, not because he was scared of falling in, but because his hands just needed a job. 40 minutes past Egg Rock, Walt Pelletier spotted the blow first, like always. Walt had fished those waters for 31 years before his knees retired him, and he'd been riding the Bridget Ann every single week since his wife passed, partly because he loved whales, and partly, in his own words, because somebody's got to keep an eye on these greenhorns. Holt cut the engine. The boat rocked in its own wake, and out past the bow, a puff of mist hung in the air, a beat too long to be anything but a whale catching its breath. It was Pepper. Mara knew it before the tail even broke the surface, something about how easy she came up, like she'd been expecting company. For a while, she did the usual whale things, which is to say almost nothing. A back, a blow, that slow photogenic arch before she dipped under again. The tourists did the usual tourist things, gasping, laughing, and missing the shot because they forgot to actually press the button. Then Pepper didn't dive. She drifted closer instead. And Holt did what you're supposed to do on that coast, which is nothing. You don't chase a whale, but if a whale fancies a visit, you let her come. 40 feet became 30, became 20, became close enough that Cooper could count the barnacles crusted along her jaw. And then she came up right alongside the hull and opened her mouth. Now, before you picture anything out of a horror movie, nobody got bitten, nobody nearly got bitten, but you couldn't have convinced the boat of that in the moment. 20-some grown adults screamed like they'd seen a ghost, because what was in front of them was a mouth roughly the size of a garage door, lined with row after row of baleen hanging down like a fringe curtain. Fun fact, also courtesy of Mara, usually delivered with a grin. That baleen is made of keratin, the same stuff as your fingernails. Nobody on the boat cared about that fact right then, though. They cared about the rope. It ran from one side of her jaw across her mouth and disappeared into the baleen old green lobster line. The kind every boat up and down that coast hauls by the mile, gone gray with algae and wrapped so tight for what looked like months that her jaw hung a little crooked and a little open, like a drawer that wouldn't quite close. "Is she gonna die?" Cooper asked, to nobody in particular, and also to everybody. And his mom pulled him back from the rail without quite knowing why she did it. Walt, meanwhile, was already halfway to the stern locker for a knife, muttering that he'd untangled worse than this off a lobster pot 100 times. "Walt," Holt said, hand flat on the man's chest, "you are 71 years old. You are not getting in that water." He was already on the radio with the other hand. The number for the Marine Mammal Hotline had been taped above the helm for years, and he rattled it off without even glancing up, the way you'd recite your own childhood phone number. The response boat showed up about 50 minutes later, 2 women in a little inflatable, hauling poles with hooked blades on the end so they could cut from a safe distance, because climbing in next to a spooked 40-ton animal is not, generally, a great life decision. Pepper let them work close in a way that made Mara's neck prickle a little, like the whale somehow understood the favor being done for her, though Mara kept that thought to herself, since half the tourists already believed it without any encouragement. They didn't get every inch of rope off. That rarely happens in one go. The stuff gets threaded too deep into the baleen for anything but slow, patient cutting. But they freed the wrap that mattered, the one keeping her jaw stuck open, and clipped a little satellite tag onto what was left trailing, so somebody could track her down again in a week or a month, wherever the rest finally worked loose. Then Pepper sounded, and was gone, and the water went flat and ordinary, like the whole thing had been a dream somebody told the boat to have together. Nobody talked much heading back in, though it wasn't a sad kind of quiet. More the kind you get after something turns out fine, and everybody's still catching up to that fact. Cooper fell asleep against his mom's arm. Walt stood at the back, grinning at the water as he'd personally arranged the whole rescue. And Mara, that night, wrote it all down in the log, date, head count, 1 entangled adult female humpback, ID confirmed Pepper, catalogued 2009 because somebody at the college would want it on record, and because it felt like a story too good to live only in the memory of 26 people who'd shown up that morning expecting nothing more exciting than a decent photo. 3 weeks later, the tag pinged off Mount Desert Rock, and a boat out of Lubeck snapped a photo. Rope gone. Jaw healed crooked but closed. About as crooked, Holt liked to say, as his own knee after a long line accident 20 years back. And that thing had served him just fine ever since. Mara mailed the photo, on a whim, to the address Denise Cormier had scribbled on a comment card. No note except Pepper's doing great. Figured Cooper would want to know. She didn't think much more about it until a thank you card showed up 2 weeks later with a crayon drawing tucked inside. A whale, colored bright blue, grinning ear to ear, mouth shut tight, and perfectly happy.